Welcome, Mary Lea. Glad to be speaking with you today.
Thanks, Rachel.
So I thought we might start off the conversation by talking a little bit about how we met and how this project came to be. So maybe you can just let our viewers know a little bit about how we met each other.
Well, this was my previous publisher, Colleen Dunn Bates, and you had a lot of business dealings with each other. And during COVID, like so many other things, she retired, and she'd published my first 2 books and was a friend. And I searched for a new home for the book I had just finished, and she said, "Hey, I've got a really good publisher up in Portland. They're known for what beautiful books they make. Reach out to her." And it was a little bit late in the calendar year for you at that time, but we worked out a situation where I could fit in, and so this book came to be.
And it is a very lovely book, and I think it's very timely to what we experienced over the course of the COVID days and what we're still currently experiencing. So I want to jump into some questions with you. And so, Mary Lea, this book is a reflection of a halcyon time in your life in Altadena. What gives you hope and strength for future generations to rebuild and grow Altadena?
What gives me hope and strength to rebuild in Altadena? Well, as everybody knows, the town burnt down basically overnight in a flash. And it really points out how things can, biblically change in a minute. The thing about Altadena is that, what can't be destroyed is its beautiful location. In all of Los Angeles, it has some of the most spectacular views. And everywhere around town, there are signs: Altadena strong, Altadena not for sale, Altadena rebuilds. And so there's so much energy now for those acts. And it was on the cusp of a whole new wave of young families and young people who were like discovering this place that's been here for 100 years. And so those people are adamant that they want that quality back. And there's just something about the earth up here that makes people want to keep it special.
So, a little bit of background. Not only did you grow up in this part of Southern California, you also have lived there and raised your family. So what was your writing process like when you were revisiting all of these wonderful childhood memories that we read about in the book?
Well, it's interesting since I'm not one to hang on to my past. And so it's not like even though I live less than a mile away from where I was born, it's funny. I call myself, Rachel, a world traveler. And the reality is I've never lived further than a mile from where I was born. But I still have, traveled the world quite a bit. But so for me, I had to give myself enough time to relax and to think about what are those treasures from my childhood that I wanted to write about, because I don't live large in my mind all the time. And there are some things that stand out so iconically for me that they were like the pins that I would think about that. And then from that, if I were relaxed enough and not like my ADD mind running away with me, then things would spin off from that. And I would then appreciate them today because I could see them from a distance and think, hey, this is pretty unique. I think what happens with a lot of people is that if this is your experience, if this is your life or whatever, it just is your life. And you don't recognize possibly what are the things other people might find interesting. But I was able to do that mostly because I could give myself the time to dwell a little bit. And they say, like in poetry writing, I love poetry. I used to teach it to children quite a bit, but they say in order to write a good poem, you have to first get your butterfly net. And I feel like I had to get my butterfly net out for some of these memories.
That is great. And I think that you were able to catch quite a few of great memories along the way that you can share with readers. And why don't you tell us about a particular time in your childhood that helped you shape your perspective on home and community, especially reflecting through the recent fires?
So, you know, I grew up in a different time because I'm as they say, not a spring chicken. But when I was growing up, I had, 9 brothers and sisters, and my grandmother lived with us, and our house was always packed with people, right? But my mother did not want us hanging around inside the house, and she was always shooing us out. And so we all had friends, basically across the street and around the corner, everywhere. And I spent quite a bit of time in others' houses. And I learned from them. And so my world wasn't just my house. It was the world of all the other houses around me, their parents, the way their parents interacted, the way their houses were cleaned or not cleaned. And it just occurred, your spot in the world is not just your address, 1075, whatever. It's your spot in the world that you can walk to and smell and touch. And that's kind of one of the reasons why it was important for me when we picked the neighborhood I live in now, that our kids could walk to school. Because I think I say this in the book, for me, in growing up, in helping somebody find their place in the world, a child or an adult, like for me, walking to school was school for my kids. And they will carry that. That's their place in the world that they will carry wherever else they go. I think I had so much experience like that I carried it my whole life into my adulthood, into the way I raised my family, into the way I related to my community as an adult. Yeah.
So in the book, you talk a lot about a really wonderful character who was a real person during your childhood. Her name was Mrs. McKay. And I would love to hear a little bit about Mrs. McKay and how maybe the stories you tell about her help shape your community and your perspective on community and home.
Rachel, she was amazing. And so this is another thing, is that a neighborhood can offer up so much if you are open to it, or if you can avail yourself to it. Like, just as an aside, one thing that helped me in the writing of this book is I thought, oh my gosh, what if I lived next door to the Dalai Lama, but I didn't know it? Because I don't know that person next door. But if I did know that, wouldn't I want to say hello? And so I keep thinking, like, who are the people that you would so be fascinated to know about, but you don't because you've never said hello? But there was a woman in my neighborhood, and I don't want to jump the gun, but this is the next book. And Mrs. McKay was an old lady. Everybody thought she was a witch. Well, all the kids did. The parents thought she was crazy, old kook. Not far wrong on any of that, but she turned out to be the most influential person of my childhood. And I loved my parents. I loved my grandparents. But what she taught me and anyone who fell under her influence has shaped all of their lives to this day.
That is truly amazing to hear. I mean, we all, as you mentioned, in this current age, we don't know who lives next door. I think I lived in my home for about 1.5 years before I realized that I had a neighbor who is the subject matter of an Academy Award nominated documentary. Let me say
amazing.
That. Yes. And meeting her has had a big influence on my life. So I think that's just a reminder to all of us. Get to know a little bit about your neighbors. You don't have to invite them into your home every day, but know who they are and have a relationship with them.
I think
go ahead.
To that point, I'd say, like, I think it's really, really great to be just aware of who and what is around you. Particularly in this day of like extreme distractibility and also over busy minds. All of us are overloaded with everything. But this idea, it still plays in my mind. What if actually the Dalai Lama lived next door and I didn't know that, you know?
Yeah, that would be pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So for you, Mary Lea, what role do you think nostalgia plays in how we view our communities?
Well, of course it does. And for anyone who has an imagination, you always kind of, but there's a phrase for the way you wished things were. And then they become kind of how they are in your mind. And so there's definitely an element of that in me. But, uh, y- you know, if you had a happy childhood, and they say a happy childhood is an inoculation against the hardships of life. And then there's just not a really good way to avoid letting that blossom into something perhaps greater than what it was. However, that being said, living where I live and taking for granted all of the things that I did from let's say that age of 7 to 16. Um, uh, Now in writing about them, because they were always close at hand, I think they escaped a lot of that rose-colored glasses thing. Um, but I like to combine humor with nostalgia. I like to combine inspiration with humor. And I think those would be three words that pop into my mind when I think about this book. At one turn, it's inspiring. At another turn, I hope readers will find it hilarious. At other turns, there's a wistfulness in there because of the age I'm at and the perspective I currently have on things that can be spun different ways.
Mary Lea, how did you balance personal memories with broader themes that readers can relate to in Across the Street and Around the Corner?
Right. Because it's a memoir, right? What I was aware of is that I didn't want to just like tell stories about me, myself, and I. Um, and so I would, whenever I could, if there was something I did want to write about, I was trying to be alert to any opportunities I could find where I could spin it into sort of a larger philosophy or something for the reader to ponder. So it wasn't just about, oh, a little kid walking down the street, having fun playing in the river gutter. No, what's something bigger? And so then your reader might have more something to ponder or some value. For instance, like there's a little chapter on lemonade stands. But okay, it's a lemonade stand, but really what it became is a meditation for me on how fast time flies and how you have to appreciate the moment because it's gone. When it's gone, it's gone. And that came out of like this little story on a lemonade stand. So I don't know, Rachel, I try to be alert to those types of opportunities.
Were there any stories that didn't make it into the book that still hold a lot of significance for you?
Yes, very much so. And things that didn't make it into the book were for a variety of reasons. It's either like it was already said somewhere, or you've got to figure what is the rhythm of everything. I have a friend, and she very unfortunately has passed away at a untimely way. But what she did in her neighborhood, which is adjacent to mine, is that when she moved in, she had a baby. And what she started doing, and not realizing what this was going to lead to, but she started going out on her front lawn about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which is kind of a witching hour for a lot of new mothers. They don't know what to do. So she'd go out on her front lawn and spread a blanket and just sit out in the sunshine with her new baby on the front lawn. Now, the woman across the street did not know her, had just had a baby. They did not know they had both had babies. But she said, "Look at her." And she picked her baby up and walked across the street and said hello. And so now the two of them are sitting on a blanket about 4 in the afternoon talking. And then somebody up the street saw these two gals sitting, and she came by and said hello. And the street, from that small act, developed into an outrageously good place to live because all these neighbors came together. They would have 4th of July parties that would start at 9 in the morning and end at 9 o'clock at night. The guys would get one of those gigantic American flags that like flies over a car dealership somewhere, and they would put it like across the whole street, and they would tie it onto the palm streets that lined both sides, and that was the tarp under which all the barbecues would end up. And they went on camping trips together. They had round robin dinner parties where 6 people's doors would be open, and it was like a free-for-all. It all began because one person just decided to be in her front yard rather than her backyard.
If you could describe your book in a few words or one short sentence, what would it be?
It illustrates the power of the small act. It is a gentle record of the way life was and is and could be, with just the smallest amount of attention to it. If not, maybe attention isn't the right word, but intention, I would say.
I love that. Mary Lea, I know your writing career took off a little later in life than most writers. How did you arrive here?
So, I always felt like my creativity was something like very hard for me to manage my whole life since I was, well, let's say a late teen. And that I would feel often like I had to walk down the sidewalk with a stack of shoe boxes this high and keep it all in line and keep it all in line. And then, and it was, a project was going, it was going, and then something would happen and all the boxes would fall apart. And so I called my office a boneyard with all of my creative projects that kind of would almost get there and maybe not quite get there, but then not, And so finally, before I know it, I'm 60 years old. And I felt very frustrated that I had not actually adequately been able to express myself in a creative way. I did not know what my capacities were. I did not know what was the edge of my talent. And I was 60, and I'd always said I would get back to my writing when my kids were in school. And then it was like, well, when they were in high school, and then like, now finally they've all cleared out of the house. And I felt like I was at the end of my life, right? And I hadn't been able to do this thing that had always been in me. And I was horrified by this thought, like, what if I have to live to be 90 years old? Oh my God, this is going to be like a long, dreary slog, because I felt almost like my life was finished now. So for me, which I would say that was kind of starting at a pretty low point at 60, I did a lot of philosophical reading, and I realized I had to get the negativity out of my mind. The I'm too old, or I'm not quite maybe smart enough, or why write another book? Who's reading even anymore? All of these things, I had to work with myself first, my first step, and fill my mind with much more positive things. Not why would anybody write another book today when there are so many books? It's like, if what will the world be missing if I don't write a book? This book that is in me, and who can do it except me? And with these types of thinkings, the idea that I had at that point started to grow and grow. And me personally, I actually really rely on the power of God and the power of the universe. So I kept saying, why am I being given these thoughts if I'm not supposed to act on them? Why? And then I thought, yeah, but do I have the stamina? Do I have the umph to do this? And so I then again, I relied on a power higher than myself. And I said, if you've given me these thoughts and these desires, then you better make all the doors open for me, and you better make it easy enough for me to do it. And in these types of ways, which you can say maybe you use to trick yourself into thinking that something that felt impossible is possible. But honestly, it helped me quite a bit. And so the first book I sat down to write, and I hadn't written a book before. I'd done a lot of other things, but I hadn't written a book before. And it took about 3 years. And it took that amount of time because I was also figuring out how to write a book. Every book since has been a more swift experience. But sure to my heart's desire, every door did open for that book. And I saw a new vista for myself. And I thought that everyone's life has a timing to it. And I thought, okay, this didn't happen when I was 30, but it's happening now. And I'm just trying to make, I'm trying to harvest as much of the wheat before the rain comes as possible.
I love hearing you say that, because the book that you wrote at 30 might not have been the book that you wrote at 60 or 65. So the longer perspective brings us something very different at that point. I know that writers are always looking to other writers for advice, which of course is a great thing to do. But what advice do you have for writers looking to tell their own stories?
Well, what works for me is not the idea of being disciplined, but the idea of being enthusiastic, because discipline is a boring word and an unpleasant word to me. But if you want to do something, then it's joyful, and you're like, you can't wait to get to your desk. So I would say to anybody who is wanting to get going is that look at the way you're thinking about your project, and tell yourself how fortunate you are that you get to do this. And also to check in with yourself and see what is your excitement level for your project. Because if it's not exciting to you, then you won't have the stamina required. And also maybe your readers won't be excited also. So just work on your work on those things to check in and see if you think your idea is worthy of your time and worthy of your readers' time. And to that end, there's a lot of people who are doing memoirs. I'm doing memoir, but whatever. But I think it's valuable to, in a way, to try to lift it out of a series of events, from a series of events into something of a higher, again, it put as much food for thought into your writing as you can, so that your reader has to pause every now and then and ponder something that you said, like what little twist of wisdom have you just imparted to your reader? What little analogy have you put in that might delight somebody? Yeah, I would say that. Yeah.
One of the things that as a team we all worked with you really closely on was capturing the images that are included in the book. And I would love to hear from you a little bit about that process and how you use these images to help propel and solidify some of the stories within the book.
Yeah, well, the idea of illustrating, I love it. I think it's not just for children. It's delightful to come upon an image in a book. And because this is of a very personal nature, I did have it stuck in my mind, what I wanted things to look like. And on certain things, I could give because it's just a child, doing some miscreant little thing. Like here's a very fun. I don't know if it would show up, but these are some kids that are, you know, having their way with a place they did not belong. That didn't have to have a particular personal imprint, even though it captured a feeling very, very well. I had a very strong opinion about the way the street I grew up on were to look. It's iconic in this neighborhood. And it was an interesting thing because our illustrator is not from here and didn't have the knowledge that I had. So we had to go back and forth quite a bit on that until I was satisfied. I knew I would have to be talking about this and people in my area would say, "Oh, but that's not how it looked." So for that one, I needed to sort of hold on and get it right for me. Um, and so, but it worked out great. And again, I just think in today, who doesn't love to come across an illustration in a good story? So I'm very pleased that they were able to land in the way that they did.
Well, the cover of the book includes a lot of ginkgo leaves, and I would love for you to talk just a little bit about the significance of the ginkgo leaf and the ginkgo tree to your neighbor.
So maybe if readers were looking the website, they could see some more. But we have a massive ginkgo tree in our front yard, and I have been told that it is the biggest ginkgo tree in Pasadena, and people pause and they stop. And honestly, I feel like this is almost like my spirit tree. And we have a Zen bell that hangs from it, and when the wind blows, I feel like it shelters our house. I feel like it blesses anybody who walks under it. And in our area, in our weather and climate and area, Christmas Day, it's weird. Christmas Day is when all of its magical golden leaves drop. And so many years I've sat in my big front room with the window, and you'll watch like yellow leaves just falling down. So it holds that, and the deodora tree, which is the tree of my childhood, are like my spirit trees. So I was very pleased when we could put that on the cover, Rachel.
And I love that story and that image because it's almost, we all know that Southern California has not, to my knowledge, ever had a white Christmas, but knowing that all these leaves are falling almost makes it feel a little bit like snow. And I love hearing that.
Yeah.
I know it's really hard to think about, especially the older we get, about being able to go back in time. But if you, Mary Lea, could go back to your childhood neighborhood for one day, what would you do first?
Rachel, I've thought about this. This is what I would do. I would slide into my favorite jeans, my favorite tennis shoes, and my favorite t-shirt. And then I would put my hair in braids. I would hug my mother and my father and my grandmother, and I would thank them. And then I would run out the door and run straight to Mrs. McKay's house.
I love that.
And your readers will have to see my next book to know what that's about.
And we're very excited about that. So, we all think about home in very different ways, depending on time, depending on place. But for you, what are the three words that define home for you?
Well, comfort, safety, and togetherness. Yeah. And see, I grew, and what I mean by that is like we, my brothers and sisters and my parents, we weren't really like this super loving bunch. We were very hard on each other. It was a competitive environment, but there was an assurity about everything, an assurity about the safety of the world, and about, the sun was going to rise every morning. Dinner was going to be on the table every night. And it allowed me to go very confidently into the world. And I always associate the idea of home with like a full house, not a quiet retreat. Some people, particularly in introverts, they need that quiet. And who doesn't? We all do, particularly as a writer. You need a lot of time to yourself. But nothing feels more right to me than a busy household. Yeah.
So I know that lots has changed in your neighborhood over the course of the past few months, and that some things are slightly different now. But when you think about your community before and after the fire, what are the words that define community for you?
My gosh, resilience and concern and a resolve to look to the future. The fires have really brought people together. Those, like, for instance, where I currently live right now, my neighborhood right now, our street is fine, our house is fine. There's no visible difference at all, but it's reconnected people to one another. And all of us know people who have to start over, are starting over. And it's just been really a wonderful thing to see how well people are trying to take care of other people. Whenever I hear of somebody who needs something, whenever others hear, it's always like, "Hi, what are you doing?" "Oh, well, I've just found this. I'm going to take it to somebody." It's very, very good this way. And in many ways, in every way, my book is a pre-fire book. And I lay down seeds throughout this book about what I feel is like a good way to go in life. Somebody called it a handbook on building a neighborhood without being a handbook at all. But the fire has put all of the little tiny seeds and lessons that I have in this book into, like, writ large on a canvas. And people have saved each other's lives. They've saved each other's houses. They've opened, if your house is fine, you open your closet, you open your refrigerator, you open your resources. 6 or 7 people were having all their mail delivered to our house. We have an electric car. How many people were plugging in at our house? You didn't even think about it, So that is extremely affirming, yeah.
Wow, I didn't even think about the impact of having an electric car and needing a place for it to be charged during those times. So that is a pretty amazing neighborly thing that your neighbors are doing. So after everything that's happened since Across the Street has been published, are there reflections and other stories or updates you'd now want to include in the collection that didn't get included?
Yes, because I said that I'm not one that hangs on to my childhood or my past. it is all much more precious to me now. And I would have, I think I would have written more deeply, perhaps, or more broadly about a place that actually isn't there anymore. But since I had, before the fire, it had always been there and almost intact since my earliest memories. But now that it's gone, everything is just, I don't know, that intrinsic, like, why didn't I write about this? It's almost the way all of our friends who lost their houses and their things, they say, well, why didn't I grab that before I left? Why didn't I grab that? So I'm thinking to myself, why didn't I write about that? Oh my gosh, why couldn't I have included that? Had I known that it wouldn't be there anymore, why wouldn't I, So there's that.
Yeah. And, even physical things can be very fleeting. And we've talked about this a bit offline, that in the beginning, right after the fires, many people didn't even know how to find their neighbors. And many people have moved away or staying in other places now. But kind of give us a feeling of how people are staying in touch with people who are no longer physically in the community.
Well, so just from my personal experience, I would say we have a minimum of 25 good friends who lost their houses and all the contents. And they honestly, here's where you say, text threads are amazing. But there are so many right now meetings going on, meetings on how to redesign Altadena, meetings on what are the latest resources, meetings on how to fill out your FEMA applications. And so many of those, and now I don't participate in those because I am fortunate to have everything. But because I've been a shopper for a lot of people, I heard from almost all my friends, oh, I wish I need lamps. I just need lamps in their new places that they're. So yesterday I went out. There are great resale shops and thrift shops down towards San Diego where I spend time with our grandchildren. And I came home and with a carload of lamps. So it's only a text away. Our friends they're all within 10 miles. They've been able to find places. I don't have a window on how younger families are doing. I'm aware of what people in my age group are doing. And actually, all of them are planning to rebuild. So none of them have moved super far away, because they want to check on their property. They want to see how the Army Corps of Engineers are doing with the cleanup, which has been fantastic. They've been great. And my hope is, it's hard to say what the future brings, but my hope is that a very active community town is in the early stages of coming together. Yeah.
A little while ago, we took some time to reflect back on what you would do if you could go back in time. If you could live for another 100 years and pop in and see what your community is up to, what would you hope to find?
You mean if I were in 100 years?
Yes, 100 years from today. What would you hope to find in your neighborhood?
I would hope to find a place to live that is so ecologically and climate-wise advanced that it maintains an integrity of historical proportions, because in that people, if we keep going the way we're going, people have dire predictions. But honestly, it's an opportunity to have the most innovative types of homes, since there's nothing there now, to have walkability, to have a return of where trust and personal relationships are paramount to, virtual relationships. I would hope that the best qualities of today, which are many, Rachel, right? The best qualities of today have been preserved and honored and are thriving 100 years from now.
What do you think Mrs. McKay would think of all that?
She was, she was somebody who was so practical, and her feet were on the ground and her eye was on the bottom line at all times, that she would probably insist that everybody had raised bees, grew their own food, and ate ice cream at night. She would just approach it all time. She was out of time and place, and the things that she honored and spent her life on in 1960s are the things that she would insist that people do today. Her two main things were trying to rid the world of starvation and create world peace. And she did it by the tiniest acts from her property. And those are things that probably will be with us in 100 years. And she would just be addressing them the same.
Mary Lea, I know you well enough and have gotten to know you over the course of the past couple of years that I'm pretty confident that there is a new project, that you're not just sitting by and looking at things. I know you're very busy with some new additions to your family. You're very busy supporting neighbors who are living in your community who need your support right now. But tell us, a year from now, what can we expect to hear that you'll be working on?
Well, Rachel, this book, Across the Street, Around the Corner, opened a huge world for me again. And many of the readers have fallen in love with a character that is in the book. Her name is Mrs. McKay. I think she's on page 96 or something. And my brother, Kevin, and she's still in my life, a woman by the name of Vicky. The three of us were very involved with Mrs. McKay's children. And I realize that she deserves an entire book. And that is my the project I'm into right now. It is a ton of fun to write. It's just been a ton of fun. So that is what I am working on. And I also do one other thing that's a sidebar that I use to keep my creativity going, which is storytelling. And so my hope is to also be able to find gigs and opportunities to polish up different stories and just be like entertaining in my storytelling life.
Mary Lea, I want to thank you for your time today and sharing all these stories with us. And you'll be able to follow Mary Lea by taking a look at her website. You'll see the URL at the end of this video. And you'll also be able to sign up for her newsletter and keep touch on what's going on with her story writing and storytelling, and more about Mrs. McKay to come, in addition to lots of great essays that Mary Lea frequently contributes to local publications.
Rachel, thank you for the opportunity to talk.
Thanks, Mary Lea. Have a great day.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Bye.